Hey guys, it's Courtney, and today we're going to be making 3 pretty quick and simple cards using the bubble wrap stencil as well as the POW stencil from Hurley Create. We're going to be doing some tone-on-tone ink blended backgrounds with these stencils and obviously with some Hurley Create inks. And these are probably my favorite inks for ink blending. I love ink blending just as much as I love Copic coloring, so I figured we'll stick to ink blending being all my Copic markers are dried up. So I'm going to start with a piece of the Stark White cardstock by Hurley. And I'm using a traditional ink blending tool by Ranger. Now you can use an ink blending brush or makeup brush or whatever you have in your stash. I've had these for so long, and I know I get a lot of comments that people are unable to get their hands on the makeup brushes or the blending brushes, but I just wanted to kind of show you guys that you can get pretty good results with these blending tools as well. So I'm just going to go in rainbow order. The inks that I'm using are Bee Sting, Traffic Cone, Over the Moon, Later Gator, Remember Me, and Triple Berry. And I'll link all of those below. But I'm just going to go in rainbow order. Now, obviously, you don't have to use a rainbow theme here for any of your cards. But just keep in mind that you're going to want to use inks that blend well together. I did previously do a video on color combinations and basic color theory, very simple color theory. And I'll link that below if you guys have any questions about what colors will go with what and what colors will absolutely not go with what. So you can see that I'm going in with a pretty light hand. The ink blending doesn't have to be perfect for this technique. And that's what's great about the dye inks like Hurley's inks, is because you can kind of build on them. You can go as light or dark as you want to go. You can see that I didn't have a whole lot of ink on that blue pad there, and I got some streaky lines. Make sure that the ink blending tool is really nice and inked up, and that way you won't get those streaky lines. But anyway, I went ahead and did 2 panels like this, one just a little bit darker than the other, and put those aside. Next, we're going to work on a piece of watercolor paper, and instead of doing ink blending, I'm just going to create a watercolor background. But I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the rainbows, but this time I'm only going to use 3 colors. I'm basically skipping 3 and using 3 because these colors will make the other 3 colors that we're missing. So if you don't have all of the colors of the rainbow, it's okay. You can still make a rainbow. So I'm going to add some red to the top, and I've already added some water to my panel itself, and I'm going to bring that red down a little bit further than it would normally go. Then I'm going to bring in the yellow. I'm going to add the yellow into that blank area, but I'm also going directly over the red, just towards the bottom of that red area, and that's going to make my orange. I don't need an orange ink. Same thing for the blue. I'm going to kind of overlap that against the yellow, and that's going to make my green. I'm going to bring that blue all the way down to the bottom and just add a little bit more red, and that will make my purple. So again, just refer to that video if you guys have any questions, but it becomes pretty simple once you get the hang of it. So now that all of my panels are complete with the ink, we're going to add even more ink. This is where we're going to create this tone on tone. So probably the most traditional way that you see tone on tone with stencils is just adding ink blending on the bottom and ink blending over the stencil, which is what we're going to do here. So I'm taking one of those ink blended panels that we did in the beginning, and I'm just going to use the same inks that I did for the background, and I'm just going to add a little bit more color. This is the one that's a little bit lighter than the other. That way I have room to kind of build up and make these areas a little bit darker. I couldn't for the life of me find the ink blending tool that I used for the yellow. God only knows where that went. So I ended up having to use a makeup brush for that one just because I was sick of looking for it. But it will work the same. But I'm just working my way down the same color combination in the same order that I did before, kind of sort of staying right on top of the area that I have ink blended underneath so that it will give more of a seamless look. But again, if it's not perfect, nobody's ever going to know the difference. So again, going to finish off with that triple berry, and then I can remove my stencil. I do have that stuck down with some pixie spray too. So next I'm going to bring out the next panel here, and this is the one that's just a little bit darker. And I'm going to use the same stencil. This is the bubble wrap stencil. Again, going to stick that down with some pixie spray. And this time, instead of adding color, I'm going to take a little bit of it away. So I have some packaging off to the side, and I'm taking a new pad for my ink blending tool. This is a clean one. And I'm going to take some shimmer spray. You can use plain water for this if you want. I just like the shimmer. And I'm going to pounce on the shimmer spray onto that stencil. I like to let it sit for about 10 seconds or so, and then I will take a paper towel just to dab that up. Now, when you take your paper towel to the paper, you do not want to rub the paper towel. You just want to dab it up to remove some of that color, but you don't want to move the color around. You want to remove it, if that makes sense. So I'm going to work in little areas at a time here. I'm not going to do the whole thing. And I'm just going to kind of work in 3 different sections here, but I'm basically doing the same thing, just pouncing on that shimmer spray, dabbing that up with a paper towel. I would let this dry for a minute or two. I didn't. I was impatient, and I removed my stencil, and it's hard to tell on camera, but we do have a ton of shimmer left behind there. For my final panel, this is the watercolor panel here. I'm going to use the POW stencil, and I'm going to do the ink blending right on top of my watercolor background. But remember, for this one, we only use 3 different colors, and I'm only going to use 3 different colors for my ink blending as well. So I'm starting off with that red, and I'm just going to bring it down a little bit further than I would normally want it to go. Then add in my yellow, bring that up further and down further than I would normally go. Same thing with the blue, and then once again finishing off with that purple. No, I didn't finish off with the purple. I finished off with the red on the bottom to make purple. And you may have to go back and forth a little bit just to make sure that you get the color that you're looking for, but pretty much you're going to get a rainbow with only 3 colors rather than 6. So I can go ahead and remove that stencil there. And you can see we get a nice tone-on-tone look. And for the cards, we're going to keep these super simple, guys. I'm only going to be adding sentiments. So I'm going to be using the Encouraging Words stamp set as well as the Doodle Florals, just because I love the sentiments from both of these stamp sets. For this first one here, I did trim this down just a little bit, and I am going to heat emboss this large sentiment from the Encouraging Words stamp set. I treated my panel with my anti-static tool, went ahead and stamped out that large sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a fast-drying pigment ink. So you have to kind of move quick, but not super quick. Sprinkled on some clear embossing powder, and then heat set that with my heat gun. I have a piece of black cardstock off to the side there that is cut just a little bit larger than my card panel, but still a little bit smaller than the card base itself. That way I have that little black border and a little bit of a white border, and this will really make your panel pop. If you guys have ever watched my channel before, you will know that I like to do this a lot for especially with simple cards, because I feel like it just adds just enough where you don't have to use a ton of supplies. You don't even have to have a ton of supplies to make some quick cards. So went ahead and layered that onto my A2 size card base. I did have some warping, so I had to add some extra pressure there, but that is it for the first one. For the second one here, this is the one that we used the shimmer powder on. I went ahead and trimmed that down too, and when you trim this down, you want to make sure that it doesn't really matter how much you take off the sides, but when you're taking off the top and the bottom, you want to make sure that you're taking off a little bit from each, because if you take off 1/4 of an inch from the top, you're going to lose your red, or if you take off 1/4 of an inch on the bottom, you're going to lose your purple. So you just take a little bit off of both. So for this one, I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment as well, but I am going to use just the Versamark clear sticky ink and some white embossing powder on this one, but I'm pretty much just doing the same thing as I did before. And I'm not going to matte this one, being I'm using white. This is a little bit more of a subtle card, so I want this to be no black border on it. So this is trimmed down to 1/4 of an inch, smaller than an A2 size card. So I'm going to pop this up with some fun foam. I use the fun foam. I get this stuff at Walmart in the kids crafting section. It's pretty cheap. It has adhesive on one side, which makes it a little bit easier. And I have this cut down just a little bit smaller than the card panel itself. I add some double-sided adhesive to the other side of it, and then I can stick that down onto my card base. And this just adds a little bit added interest, just having that popped up a little bit. So for my final panel here, this is the watercolor one here, and I kind of debated how I wanted to do this. At first I was just going to add the sentiment, but decided to add a little bit extra something to this. So I am going to white heat emboss the sentiment onto a piece of black cardstock. I was initially going to go right on that panel, but decided to add a little dimension to this one. So again, I'm going to make sure that I treat this with my anti-static tool. You want to make sure that you do this, especially when you're working on darker colored cardstock and you're using something like white or a metallic embossing powder. This will just prevent your embossing powder from sticking to areas that you don't want it to stick to. You can brush it off with a dry paintbrush, but sometimes it gets in those little areas where it's hard to do, and this just will save you a ton of time. So I went ahead and heat set that, and I'm going to trim down my panel, not on the, well, this is going to be a landscape card, but I'm only trimming it off the two sides, and I'm going to trim quite a bit off because I want to have the black border on the top and the bottom rather than all four sides. So I also trimmed down my sentiment strip here. I switched over to my mini tonic trimmer, which I prefer for sentiment strips. I feel like I have a little bit more control over it. And I don't know, for some reason I feel like I can line it up a lot easier with this little mini paper trimmer. So for this one, I'm just going to adhere that black piece of cardstock onto a card base. And this black cardstock is cut regular A2 size 5.5 by 4 1/4. I'm having a hard time speaking today. And then I'm going to adhere my watercolor panel here. I'm going to use my Tombow Mono Multi Glue for this one too. I was going to pop it up, but I am completely out of fun foam. Finally, it took me a while, but I'm completely out. And then I'm going to finish off by just popping up my sentiment strip right there in the center. And that is it for card number 3. Very, very simple, but you can kind of play around with your inks. You can get a lot of cool effects with them. So here's a quick look at all 3 cards that we created today. As always, I will leave all of the supplies listed in the description box below. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and have a great day. Bye.